The trolley. Ryunosuke Akutagawa. The construction of a light railway between Odara and Ami began when Ryohei was just 8 years old. Every day, Ryohei would head out to the outskirts of the village to watch the progress, not so much the construction itself, but the fascinating sight of the trolley hauling soil back and forth. 2 laborers would stand on the trolley, piled high with soil. Since it was a downhill slope, the trolley rolled on its own, needing no push. The platform shook as it went. The edges of the workers' coats fluttered in the wind, and the narrow rails bent slightly with the weight. Scenes like these made Ryohei long to be one of those laborers himself. At the very least, he wished he could ride the trolley just once. When the trolley reached the flat land at the village edge, it naturally came to a stop. At that moment, the laborers would nimbly jump off and dump the load at the end of the line. Then, they'd turn around and start pushing the trolley back up the hill toward the mountain. Watching them, Ryohei always wished that if he couldn't ride it, he could at least help push. One evening in early February, Ryohei went with his younger brother and another neighborhood boy, both 2 years younger, to where the trolley was parked at the edge of the village. The trolley sat there, caked in mud in the dim light. There was no sign of the laborers anywhere. The 3 boys hesitantly approached the trolley and gave it a cautious push. As their strength combined, the wheels suddenly turned with a thud. The sound gave Ryohei a slight chill, but the second thud didn't scare him. Clunk, clunk. The trolley slowly rolled forward as the 3 boys pushed it uphill along the track. After covering about 10 meters, they reached a steeper slope, and the trolley grew difficult to move. The 3 of them pushed as hard as they could, but eventually they couldn't budge it. If they weren't careful, the trolley would start rolling back, pushing them along with it. Deciding they had gone far enough, Ryohei signaled to the younger boys. "All right, let's get on." They let go of the trolley simultaneously and leapt onto it. At first, it moved slowly, but it quickly picked up speed, racing downhill. The scenery ahead split apart on both sides, spreading out before them as they shot forward. Ryohei felt the evening wind hit his face, and the excitement made him almost dizzy with joy. But just 2 or 3 minutes later, the trolley had reached its original stopping point at the end of the line. "Let's push it up again." Ryohei and the younger boys started pushing the trolley back up the track. They hadn't managed to move it much when they suddenly heard footsteps approaching from behind. Moments later, those footsteps turned into a loud, angry shout. "Hey, you brats, who told you to mess with the trolley?" There stood a tall laborer in an old patterned work coat and a straw hat, completely out of season. As soon as Ryohei caught sight of this figure, he and the younger boys had already bolted 5 or 6 meters away. After that, even when he passed the deserted construction site on errands, Ryohei never thought of riding the trolley again. Yet the memory of that laborer remained vividly etched somewhere in his mind. The faint, small yellow straw hat in the dim light. Though, year by year, the memory's colors faded. About 10 days later, Ryohei was once again by himself at the construction site in the early afternoon, watching for the trolley. Along with the one loaded with soil, another trolley piled with railroad ties was slowly moving up the main track, which was eventually meant to become the main line. The 2 men pushing this trolley were both young, and from the moment Ryohei saw them, he felt oddly at ease. "These guys won't scold me," he thought, and ran over to the trolley. "Hey, mister, want me to help push?" One of the young men, wearing a striped shirt, looked down as he kept pushing and gave exactly the friendly reply Ryohei had hoped for. "Sure, go ahead and push." Ryohei squeezed between the 2 men and began to push with all his strength. "You've got quite a bit of strength there," said the other man, with a cigarette tucked behind his ear, giving Ryohei an approving nod. Before long, the track's incline began to ease. Ryohei anxiously anticipated that any moment now, they'd tell him, "That's enough. You can stop." But the young laborers kept their posture upright, silently pushing the cart forward without a word. Finally, unable to hold back any longer, Ryohei nervously asked, "Can I keep pushing as long as I want?" "Of course," they both replied at once. Ryohei thought, these are kind men. After pushing along for several hundred meters, the track began to climb steeply again, flanked on both sides by orange groves, their yellow fruits glinting in the sunlight. "I prefer the uphill path. They let me keep pushing as long as I want," Ryohei thought, leaning his whole body into pushing the cart. At the top of the orange grove, the track suddenly sloped downward. The man in the striped shirt called to Ryohei, "Hey, hop on." Ryohei quickly jumped aboard, and as soon as all three were on, the cart sped down the track, gliding past the fragrance of the orange grove. Riding is much better than pushing, thought Ryohei, feeling the wind fill his jacket. He mused, the more you push going up, the longer you get to ride coming back down. When the trolley reached a bamboo grove, it gradually slowed down and came to a stop. The three of them once again began to push the heavy trolley forward. The bamboo thicket soon turned into a mixed forest, and on some steep sections, the rails were so covered with red, rust-colored fallen leaves that they were almost invisible. After a difficult climb, a vast, chilly view of the sea opened up beyond a tall cliff. At that moment, Ryohei suddenly realized just how far they had come. They got back on the trolley, which rolled beneath the branches of the trees with the sea to their right. However, Ryohei no longer felt the same excitement as before. He thought, "I hope we can go back soon." Still, he knew that they couldn't turn around until they reached their destination. The next stop was at a thatched tea house nestled against a mountainside. The two laborers went inside and leisurely began drinking tea with the woman of the house, who had a baby strapped to her back. Left on his own, anxiously wandered around the trolley, noticing how its sturdy wooden platform was splattered with dried mud. After a while, as they left the tea house, the man who usually had a cigarette tucked behind his ear handed Ryohei a paper-wrapped sweet. Ryohei muttered a quiet thank you with indifference, but quickly realized his tone might seem ungrateful. To amend this, he placed one of the sweets in his mouth, though it carried a faint taste of kerosene from the newspaper it was wrapped in. As they pushed the trolley up a gentle slope, Ryohei's mind was elsewhere, fixated on thoughts of getting home. When they descended the next hill, they encountered another similar tea house. While the workers went inside, Ryohei sat on the trolley, increasingly preoccupied with the idea of returning. The fading afternoon sunlight cast a soft glow over the blooming plum blossoms in front of the tea house. "The sun is setting," he thought, unable to sit still any longer. He kicked the trolley's wheels and tried pushing it, even though he knew he wouldn't be able to move it on his own. Eventually, the laborers emerged and, with a casual wave, one of them said to him, "You'd better head back. We're staying up ahead tonight. You don't want your parents to worry if you're out too late." Ryohei was momentarily stunned. Darkness was quickly approaching, and he realized that the distance back was 2 or 3 times longer than the route he'd taken with his mother last winter to a nearby village. Now, he had to walk all that way alone. He felt on the verge of tears, but quickly decided that crying would do no good. He had no time to lose. With a brief bow to the young laborers, he took off, following the tracks. For a while, he ran alongside the rails, lost in thought. The package of sweets in his pocket became a burden, so he tossed it aside, along with his wooden sandals. Small stones dug into his feet through his thin tabby socks, but the lightness spurred him on. As he climbed a steep slope, sensing the ocean on his left, tears welled up despite his efforts to hold them back. Even if he managed to stifle the urge to cry, His nose emitted a constant, muffled sob. As Ryuhei dashed past the bamboo thicket, the red glow over Mount Higanyama was fading, adding to his growing unease. The landscape looked different on the way back, making him feel disoriented. The sweat-soaked fabric of his clothes clung to him, making him even more uncomfortable, so he threw his Harry off to the side of the path and kept running with all his might. By the time he reached the orange groves, darkness had settled in. As long as I make it back alive, he thought, stumbling and slipping but pressing on. When he finally spotted the village outskirts and the work site in the dim evening light, he felt a sudden urge to cry. He sniffled a little but kept going, unwilling to stop just yet. Entering his village, he noticed the warm glow of electric lights shining from the homes on either side. Ryuhei could even see steam rising from his sweat-drenched head in the light. Women drawing water at the well and men returning from the fields noticed his breathless sprint, asking, "Hey, what's happened?" But Ryuhei kept silent, running past the familiar stores and lit houses without a word. As Ryuhei burst through the gate of his home, he could no longer hold back his sobs. He wailed loudly, which quickly drew his parents to him. His mother tried to comfort him, wrapping him in her arms, but Ryuhei only continued to cry, gasping and trembling, unable to stop. The intensity of his cries even brought a few neighboring women to the dimly lit gate. Everyone, including his parents, asked repeatedly why he was crying, but Ryuhei couldn't explain. All he could do was cry, overwhelmed by the memory of his lonely, terrifying journey home. Years later, at 26, Ryuhei moved to Tokyo with his wife and child, where he now works on the second floor of a publishing company, marking proofs with a red pen. Sometimes, without any particular reason, he recalls that moment. Even now, exhausted from the day's work, he sees before him that same dim road with its shadowed thickets and slopes stretching onward in a single, endless path.